Have you ever sat in the very house you grew up in and felt like you didn't belong there anymore? Have you ever forced a smile just to hide the fact that your heart was breaking because the man you call father looked you in the eye in front of everyone and said you were nothing? I came back to my family's ranch in Colorado on a late autumn afternoon. The wind was cold, shaking the golden leaves off the trees, scattering them across the fields. This land had been my childhood, wide, quiet, wrapped in white fences, horse stalls, and the warmth of a wood-burning stove. But this time, though everything looked the same, nothing felt the same. I'm Claire, 39, never married. No fancy house, no high-ranking title. Instead of taking over the ranch like my father always hoped, I spent the last decade working with public health organizations in East Africa, helping women who had nothing but two hands and the fragile hope of a better life for their children. I never saw it as walking away. I saw it as living with purpose. But not everyone saw it that way. That day was my father's 70th birthday. Gerald Monroe, a man admired by the whole town, but one who had never truly understood me. The living room was packed with relatives, laughter, wine glasses clinking, and eyes waiting for what would come next. When everyone had taken their seats at the long dining table, he stood, lifted his glass, and spoke. Today, I'm officially passing on the ranch to Logan, Claire's younger brother. He knows business. He understands numbers. And he understands family. The room burst into applause. I sat still. Not because I cared about the inheritance, but because of what he said next. As for Claire, my daughter, she chose to run off chasing dreams in some faraway land. Kind-hearted, sure, but kindness doesn't feed horses. Or yourself. There was a soft wave of laughter. No one defended me. I smiled too, but the kind of smile you wear to stop yourself from crying. My heart folded in on itself, quietly and completely. I looked around the table. My mother had passed when I was still in high school. She used to say, "You don't have to be like anyone else, Claire. Just keep your heart kind." But she wasn't here to say that now. And my father. I don't think he ever truly understood what that meant. I said nothing for the rest of the dinner. I poured wine for my aunts, helped clear plates, and quietly stepped outside to the old wooden swing where I used to sit on nights when I missed my mom. I don't think Logan is a bad person. He's just living by the rules he was taught. Success, status, control, all the things my father worshipped. I didn't leave because I gave up. I left to find meaning. I once helped a 9-year-old girl with a twisted leg walk for the first time with a donated crutch. I watched a mother carry her child across a border just to survive. To me, those were real things. That was my reason. But to my father, everything I'd done was just running from responsibility. The quiet lesson I learned that day? Not every family will understand you, even if they share your blood. And sometimes the deepest hurt isn't being denied money. It's being denied your presence. That night, I slept in my old room. All that remained was a wooden bed and a dusty photo frame. I didn't cry. I just lay there wondering, has anyone in this family ever truly seen me? I didn't know the answer. Not until the next morning when my grandmother's lawyer appeared. She was the only one who ever told me. There's more strength in your silence than in most people's loudest moments. And in his hand was a letter. A letter that had been sealed for 6 years. And from that moment on, everything began to change. My grandmother's quiet rebellion from the grave. The next morning, I was at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes when I saw an old Jeep pull up the gravel driveway. Stepping out was Mr. Douglas, my grandmother Edith Monroe's longtime attorney. I remembered him from when I was a little girl. He used to come by to sign land papers with her, always slipping a peppermint into my hand when no one was looking. He stepped inside, gave me a soft nod, and said quietly, "Claire, there's something your grandmother left behind, something I wasn't allowed to reveal until today." We sat in the living room. Logan was still asleep. My father was out checking the stables. The room was quiet, just me, Mr. Douglas, and a pale yellow envelope he placed on the wooden table where I had smiled through my sadness the night before. 6 years ago, he continued, during my final meeting with Mrs. Edith, she added a sealed amendment to her will. Per her request, it was only to be opened if Claire was excluded from the inheritance. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even in death, my grandmother had known this family all too well. I remembered her so clearly. Every winter, she taught me how to knit by hand. On Sunday mornings, she would take me out to the pasture, not to work, but to watch the sunrise and tell me stories of the past. She had co-founded this ranch with my grandfather, but after his passing, her voice had slowly faded into the background. She never complained. But now I understood she hadn't stayed quiet out of weakness. She was watching. And when the time came, she chose to act not loudly but deliberately. I opened the envelope. Inside was a stamped legal document confirming that Edith Monroe had retained 52% ownership of the Monroe Ranch until the day she passed. If I were ever removed from the inheritance, her shares would transfer entirely to me, including all voting and decision-making rights. No discussion. No permission needed from my father. She had already made sure of that. Alongside the legal document was a small wooden box, old and unfinished. I lifted the lid. Inside was a sewing needle and a half-stitched piece of cloth. On one side a flower. On the other part of a sentence. Speak softly but lead with courage. I traced my fingers along the thread. She had stitched each word by hand, then stopped before it was finished. Maybe she knew her time was running out. But she wanted me to see that even unfinished, the message was complete. That was when it truly hit me. Some people don't argue for you out loud. They simply prepare a path so that when you're pushed out of the place once called home, you can still move forward with your head held high. My grandmother never fought with my father about me. Not once. But here she was, even from the other side, standing up for me, not with words, but with something stronger. Legal clarity, emotional truth, and unwavering faith. What about you? Has someone ever quietly stood by your side, even if they never said it out loud? If they have, I hope you'll share their story in the comments. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who say the least. When Mr. Douglas left, I stayed there for a long while holding that half-finished embroidery in my hands. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grateful. Grateful for a woman the world had once dismissed as too quiet, who had quietly helped me stand tall. From that moment on, I knew I was no longer just a guest on this ranch. I hadn't returned to claim power. I'd come back to protect what was left of Grace. But deep down, I also knew not everyone would welcome that. Especially not when a woman who had once walked away was now back holding all the power. And just as I expected, they didn't make it easy. When they fought dirty, I chose to stay clean. Just a few days after Mr. Douglas left the ranch, everything shifted fast. Logan didn't say anything at first. He avoided eye contact, stayed quiet. But I knew that kind of silence. It wasn't acceptance. It was the silence of someone planning their next move. And then it came in the form of a local newspaper article. Big headline. Philanthropist or fraud? The shadowy past of the Monroe Ranch's new leader. The article was filled with vague accusations, claims that I had once been under investigation in Africa, that I had misused funds, that I abandoned patients. No evidence. No sources. Just insinuation. But enough to plant doubt. My father set the paper down on the breakfast table, sipped his coffee, and didn't look at me. No questions. No defense. Nothing. That was the moment I realized no one planned to fight fair. I had two choices. Option 1, fight back. Go public. Clear my name. Sue for defamation. Option 2, stay quiet and prove the truth with my actions. I chose the second. Every morning I started with listening. I walked through the ranch, spoke to the stable hands, the bookkeeper, the supply manager. No big meetings. No grand speeches. Just one question. Is there anything that's bothered you that you've never felt safe enough to say? The answers started to come. A strange gap in the supply budget. Invoices with unclear vendors. A large contract approved for a company that had already been blacklisted in another state. All roads pointed in the same direction. Logan. It took me 2 weeks to gather everything. But numbers don't lie. One late afternoon, I found a dusty binder shoved behind a cabinet. Inside, records of bonuses and internal fund allocations over the last 18 months. One entry stood out. A clean water project processing fee, wired to a company registered under Logan's old college roommate. I wasn't shocked. I was heartbroken. Not because Logan had spread lies about me, but because the same boy who once flew kites with me in the pasture had grown into a man who believed power was something you had to steal. That night, I sat alone in my grandmother's old room, her rocking chair still creaking in the corner. I remembered how she used to mend my shirts by hand. She once told me, "Those who do wrong fear silence. But those who live right don't need to raise their voice." And I realized this wasn't about reputation anymore. This was a test of character. The quiet lesson I learned. When people fight dirty, your instinct might be to fight back. But if you use their weapons, you become like them. You don't have to destroy someone to prove you're right. Sometimes doing the right thing is enough to let the truth rise on its own. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Someone twisting the truth, lying about you to make others doubt who you are? If you have, how did you respond? Did you fight back, or stand your ground? Share in the comments. You never know, someone might need to hear how you made it through. The next morning, I brought all the documents to Mr. Halpern, a longtime member of the ranch's board. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't name names. I simply said, I'm not here to take Logan down. I'm here to fix what needs fixing because Edith believed we could be better. He didn't say much. Just nodded and replied, then let's start at next week's board meeting. I knew then this was just the beginning. Logan wouldn't stay quiet. And my father, well, I doubted he was ready to admit anything just yet. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I knew deep down, I was standing on the side of what's right. And sometimes being the woman who chooses kindness is exactly what makes you strong. Even when the mud starts flying, power doesn't always shout, sometimes it just stands still. The board meeting was held on a Tuesday morning in the old barn, now converted into a makeshift office. I arrived early wearing a simple cream blouse, not to impress anyone, but because it was the same color my grandmother used to wear on important days. Logan showed up after me, carrying a thick folder, his expression blank, as if none of this was real. My father was already seated, arms folded, leaning back in his chair. No one greeted me. No one asked if I needed anything. I opened my laptop and began presenting each irregular expense, each faded invoice, each payment made to a company linked to one of Logan's connections. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't blame. I simply laid out the facts. Clearly. Calmly. Enough. The silence in the room felt like the stillness before a storm. No one defended Logan. No one applauded me. But their eyes began to shift. They weren't listening because I shouted. They were listening because I didn't back down. My father stayed quiet, sipping his coffee, though I noticed a slight tremble in his hand. Logan leaned back, staring blankly at the wall as if the weight of it all hadn't quite settled in yet. I don't want anyone to lose their job, I said gently. I just want what Edith built, to stay out of the hands of those who never deserved it. I will never forget that moment. There were no outbursts. No slammed fists. No tears. Just me standing in the center of it all, holding my ground. And that's when I understood something important. Real power doesn't come from who yells the loudest. It comes from the one who doesn't need to yell to be heard. I once witnessed this in a community leadership workshop in Kenya. A woman named Nalia stood up when the village leaders proposed cutting food rations for the children. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply held her granddaughter's hand and said, if they go hungry, I'll go hungry. But I won't stay silent. The village stood behind her, not because she had power, but because she had the courage to stand still. After the meeting, I went to check the stables. A young worker named Kelsey, someone who had always avoided me, walked up slowly. I think you did the right thing, she said softly. Not everyone's brave enough to stay quiet like that. I smiled. Not because it felt like praise, but because I knew I was walking the path my grandmother had once walked. The quiet lesson I learned that day? You don't have to prove your strength by defeating someone else. You just have to stand steady enough not to be bent by what's wrong. And in time, people will see exactly how strong that is. Have you ever chosen to stand still instead of speaking loudly? Have you ever won not by shouting but by holding firm to what you believed was right? If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes your silent strength is exactly what someone else needs to see. A few days after the meeting, Logan left the ranch. No goodbyes. No farewells. Just one day he was gone. His office empty. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. What I felt was responsibility. I began reviewing our systems, rewriting policies, bringing back workers who had been let go unfairly. I didn't rebuild the ranch from scratch. I just fixed what should have been fixed long ago. My father still said nothing. Still kept his distance. Still looked at me like I didn't belong. But I hadn't returned to be accepted. I came back because someone once believed in me enough to leave behind not just land, but a legacy built on values. I don't know how this will end. But I know this. If I want to rebuild something that lasts, I can't do it with anger. I have to do it with compassion. Starting with the people who were broken long before I arrived. Legacy is not what you inherit, it's what you choose to build. A month after Logan left the ranch, I found myself sitting alone in my grandfather's old office. Once the heart of the ranch, it had long since become just another place to store files and dry financial reports. I wiped the dust off a photo of my grandmother Edith and placed it on the bookshelf. She had never hung a single diploma on these walls. What she chose to keep were family photos and promises no one else had followed through on. The first thing I did wasn't to appoint a new manager. It was to send out over 30 letters. Letters to people who had once worked on this ranch, but had been let go for being difficult, disloyal, or asking too many questions. I didn't write apologies. I simply invited them back if they still wanted to return. No one was asked why they left. No one had to explain. I only wrote one thing. If you once considered this place your home, the door is still open. Half of them came back. Rosa, a middle-aged woman who once ran the kitchen, was the first to return. She brought with her a tin of ginger cookies and a sentence I'll never forget. "You're not like them. You don't give orders. You listen." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat and had tea with her. Sometimes healing doesn't need big words. It just needs presence. I began changing how the ranch worked. Not with bold slogans, but with quiet reforms. Flexible hours for parents. Profit sharing for longtime workers. A scholarship fund for employees' children interested in agricultural trades. I didn't want to build an empire. I wanted to build a place where people felt valued, even if they didn't hold power, because I knew what it felt like to be pushed out. And I chose not to let anyone else feel that way again. One day, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a receipt, an anonymous 7-figure donation to the women's shelter I'd once worked with in Kenya. On the memo line, just 3 words. In honor of Claire. I knew who it was from. And I knew. Sometimes the most powerful apologies are the ones never spoken out loud. The quiet lesson I carry with me now is this. Legacy isn't land or shares or paperwork. It's the feeling you leave in the room after you've walked out of it. Some people inherit a fortune. Others choose to rebuild from the ashes of what was lost. And that, to me, is real strength. Have you ever felt like you had to rebuild something that others broke? Have you ever taken the path no one applauded, but you knew it was the right one? Tell me in the comments. I believe there are more of us out there than we think. And if you're still searching for stories that are gentle, but go deep enough to reach the parts of you that rarely get spoken to, if you believe that revenge doesn't have to be bitter, that sometimes it can look like quiet growth, subscribe to this channel. Because here we don't tell stories to make anyone feel triumphant. We tell stories so those who've been seen as too soft can finally see their softness as strength. The ranch doesn't shine these days, but it's warmer. Not filled with strangers, but with people who want to stay. As I walked down the hallway, I passed a faded painting of Grandma Edith riding her horse in her younger years. I reached out, touched the frame, and whispered, "I'm not here for revenge, Grandma. I'm just finishing what you started." And for me, that's enough.